Are you disgusted by any form of technicality or emotion within heavy metal and instead just want to endlessly feed on chuggy fat riffs layered underneath the sound of a pig being violently throttled and a beer can being hit with a stick? Are you a big fan of joking infectiously or any other combination of disgusting terms combined in a random manner that I cannot safely say within the first minute of a YouTube video? Do you prefer the sound of a drumstick hitting a literal beer keg instead of an actual musical instrument such as, I don't know, a snare? Well, it seems like slam metal is the perfect genre for you, but what is slam metal and why has it become inherently connected to every individual who looks like this? To put slam metal in simple terms, imagine the heaviest, most depraved, disgusting form of heavy metal. Everything technical or melodic is eradicated from the music, and instead the bands focus all their efforts on creating the fattest, most disgusting riff possible. That is essentially slam metal. I think we can all agree that instruments intended to create music should be utilized in a way that's, musical. Yeah, not in slam. Each and every instrument within the genre immediately turns into percussion. Guitars play fat, sluggish, slow-paced riffs. The bass just usually follows the guitar. The vocals are low-pitched gutturals and occasionally employ hip-hop style rhythms, and the drums are just a mess that somehow are more high-pitched than the rest of the instrumental, unless you're listening to exclusively the kick, of course, as bands utilize as many kicks as humanly, or more accurately in the modern day, computerly possible. All this is layered with the highest pitched, pingiest snare that can be achieved by Wigger kind. Although slam defines a music genre, it's also a terminology used to describe a particular element of the music that isn't just exclusive to slam metal. It's essentially just a section of guitar that utilizes slow, palm-muted power chord riffs with chromatic notes and harmonics. Riffs that are so heinously distorted it's impossible to accurately distinguish note from note, unless it's the random harmonic, of course. Slam is commonly considered to be one of the heaviest subgenres of metal, primarily due to its focus on the riff, although occasionally more technical elements are utilized within the music, such as tremolo sections, blast beats, and consistent time signature changes. If you do partake in these techniques and label your music as slam, however, you will immediately get harassed by at least 7 individuals who look like this. Slam focuses on the simple things in life. It's the most stripped back version of metal you can typically find. The power simply comes from just the riff, as opposed to a twink with a guitar consistently flexing how fast they can play a solo. The quote-unquote musicians focus their efforts on creating something as heavy as humanly possible. Vocals are pretty consistently entirely inaudible, with vocalists utilizing gutturals and pig squeals to make sure under no circumstance can anyone make out the lyricism that is typically used within the genre, which is probably a good thing, to be fair, due to the words that the lyrics usually contain. Slam can very easily be defined by what it doesn't include equally as what it does. If you're a slam band, don't you dare play a solo, tremolo riff, or anything that could be considered technical death playing. You will immediately be called a nerd and lose your whip card for all eternity. Oh yeah, and how can I forget? We cannot cover the genre conventions of slam without at least mentioning the snare tone, or lack thereof. Snares within slam usually sound completely and utterly heinous, either akin to somebody literally smashing a metal bin with a rubber baseball bat, or the most high-pitched, pingiest percussion sound you can think of. This is pushed so far that the outcome barely sounds like a snare, and instead just sounds like a raccoon, or more accurately, homeless white boy in a snapback and basketball vest rummaging through the bins of a Krispy Kreme factory in hopes of finding at least one that isn't covered in mold and gunk. Production is also a prominent element of slam metal, well, once again, lack thereof. Just imagine the worst production possible. Production so bad and inaudible that many of the most iconic early albums within the scene are actually considered to be complete dog shit, even by the genre's most die-hard fans. So how did this genre actually come to be? And why is there such a thirst within the metal community for sounds that barely even resemble music? Well, this might be controversial, but I think we should first look towards early grindcore. Despite the two genres of slam and grind differing considerably in terms of sound, speed, and eventual styles, it's difficult to explore the history and origins of slam without at least mentioning the grindcore pioneers Napalm Death and Extreme Noise Terror, with a few US bands like Siege even preceding this style by a few years. Although grindcore is more inspired by punk and is commonly considered to be a hardcore punk subgenre, the blasts, gurgles, and riffs utilized by the earliest bands would be commonly employed by the later slam bands, although in a much slower, chunkier manner. Many prominent figures within the scene actually claim claim that the first ever slam riff is within the Napalm Death song Mass Appeal Madness, although as we will come to find out later, there is much debate on this topic, as Napalm Death is way too fast and somehow, God forbid, too technical to really be considered slam in the traditional sense. Although I do believe it is fair to accredit the earliest of the grind degenerates to somewhat inspiring aspects of the eventual scene, slam was born out of New York, and there's no way your average hot dog guzzling, rat scampering New Yorkian would be interested in anything coming out of the UK. I've yet to find evidence that any American could even place the UK on a fucking map. Some of you motherfuckers genuinely think Amsterdam is in England. So based on this, we have to search elsewhere to definitively comment on why brutal death metal received so much hardcore influence and eventually spat out slam. Well, it turns out it's pretty easy to figure out. We can look towards the scenes within the exact same city, and it turns out during this time period, New York had an extremely prominent hardcore scene. New York City hardcore outfits Madball and Next Step Up would inspire various bands within the New York death metal scene. Death metal bands that were particularly sick of metal being seen as a joke through thrash and power, and simply just wanted to see their audience members beat the living shit out of each other to their music. The most prominent of these bands would be Internal Bleeding, who would actually coin the term slam a few years after this point. But before we get to that, we do have to look towards One Little Riff. One Little Riff that was played on One Little album in the late 90s, a riff that somehow inspired this whole genre. Suffocation would be birthed out of the New York death metal scene in 1988. The release of Effigy of the Forgotten in 1991 would see what is commonly considered as the first ever piece of real recorded slam metal. The breakdown riff within the song Liege of Immorality is the section that resembles modern slam the most. This singular riff somehow inspired an entire genre. It encapsulated a sound that many individuals within the death metal world wanted to hear. Just pure heaviness without any focus on musical theatrics or technicality. It inspired others to follow suit, creating entire albums, songs and bands that focused on the sound that Suffocation was able to achieve for about 20 seconds in just one song. Although Suffocation are considered by the vast majority of fans to be the first band to utilize the slam riff, I do believe various other bands from different subgenres of metal prior to Liege of Immorality utilized sounds and styles in their music that were very similar to the iconic slam riff. 1988's Uncle Slam is perhaps the most unintentionally funny one based on the name alone, although it's likely that Ripping Corpse out of New Jersey were the first band to utilize the riff in 1988. That differed from Grindcore massively in the fact that it was slow as f*** and not face meltingly fast. The band then created an even heavier and more prominent proto-slam sound with their 1991 release Exhumation Day. It can be argued whether or not this album specifically inspired the slam sound, although it's clear Suffocation were at least somewhat inspired by Ripping Corpse, as there are various pictures of the band wearing their t-shirts early on in their career. As we swiftly and lazily transition back to the early 90s, we can also mention Pyrexia, who were a prominent death metal band that began utilizing slam riffs within their music. This is seen primarily on their album Sermon of Mockery, released in 1993. Within the same year, various death metal bands within the scene realized that under no circumstance did they ever want their audience members to actually understand what the f*** they were saying in their music, so began using gutturals so deep and gurgly it essentially just turned the human voice into a percussion instrument. This is the period in time where we truly begin to enter slam territory. Bands were well and truly sick of traditional death metal and its pesky musical elements, and instead wanted to create something so violent and groovy it would immediately cause audience members to beat the shit out of each other milliseconds after hearing the first chug. Internal Bleeding is the most prominent artist from this time period and would initially form in the early 90s. The band actually featured a vocalist named Eric Wigger for a short amount of time. That isn't too relevant, I just thought you should know that. The band decided to take brutal death metal, strip away all of the blast beats, the vast majority of the speed, and make the music as violent as possible, introducing a grooviness and making every element sound absolutely disgusting. The term slam was actually coined by the members of Internal Bleeding. They explained that the purpose of the groove and heaviness utilized within their brutal death metal style was intended to encourage their audience members to mosh as violently as possible. There was just one problem. They absolutely despised the terminology of mosh and how it was commonly used. Despite this, they originally called their music mosh metal, barbaric mosh, or death mosh, although during one evening, presumably over dinner, the drummer of the band would angrily announce his distaste for the band Anthrax and the way in which the band used the term mosh. They felt felt as if Anthrax were disregarding the sacred term by using it as a joke so commonly within their promotional material and music, but Internal Bleeding were far from a joke. They were true winners. So instead labeled their music as slam, referring to early hardcore punk and slam dancing. The 1995 album Voracious Contempt is considered by many to be the first real slam metal album, which is fitting as the members actually invented the name. Although slam riffs and elements of the vocals were being seen within various death metal projects and scenes beforehand, Internal Bleeding played solely slam riffs for the entire album, which in turn means they can very easily be considered the first true slam metal band. Internal Bleeding also often utilized lyricism that commonly referenced themes such as gang crime, as well as commonly utilizing hip-hop inspired rhythms. Oh yeah, and the production on the album is awful. It's legitimately considered as dog shit by the vast majority of its fans, despite how influential it has proved to be in the decades since its release, mainly just because of the production. There were of course plenty of other bands from this time period that utilized slam riffs, although most teeter on the edge of being brutal death metal, but it's all essentially the same thing to 95% of the population and realistically doesn't matter at all. Skinless, Dying Fetus would all commonly utilize the slam within their brutal death metal sound and inspired various modern bands. This is where we reach the late 90s, perhaps the most prominent era for what is considered true slam, with no band being as iconic as Devourment. Devourment would form in 1995 after Dallas death metal band Nericide would split up, with the majority of the members going on to form Devourment shortly after. The band would quickly get to work releasing the songs Shroud of Encryption and Festering Vomitous Mass, both of which would eventually be featured on the 1997 demo Impaled, alongside the song Choking on Bile. The demo would begin to circulate around the underground, with the sheer rotten intensity beginning to build the band a small dedicated fanbase, which would result in the signing to Guttural Records in 1999, which led to the release of perhaps the most iconic slam release of all time, Molesting the Decapitated. There was just one problem, however. The literal same day the CD was released, Devourment frontman Ruben Rosas was arrested for being a fugitive of the law, with the arrest essentially coming right after the album release party, resulting in the band eventually breaking up before getting back together 6 years later when members were able to artistically connect once again. Although Internal Bleeding were the first band to play the style consistently, it would be Devourment that began to receive recognition for being a true slam metal band. Their music was somehow ridiculously heavy and catchy at the same time, well, if you consider this catchy obviously. This inspired countless other bands who were able to actually latch onto a style and genre of music as opposed to just an idea or a singular 20-second riff from a full album. This led to the golden age of slam. Countless bands that would play the true, authentic, vile, abhorrent style of slam began to pop up all over the world. There were US bands, UK bands, even motherfucking Japan were getting their filthy little mitts on slam. As the 90s transitioned into the 2000s and we got even closer to the event horizon, slam continued to thrive in the underground as other styles such as thrash and power essentially just faded into obscurity. For crusty death metal fans, slam had it all. No longer was the scene overrun with overly technical melodic death metal bands who were ditching the idea of being heavy to actually play music. All traditional metal genres that focused on technicality had essentially disappeared in the early 2000s, chucked to the side like the ugly best friend. Slam was the opposite. Slam was the mysterious, sexy, although slightly deformed friend that, to be fair, did have a nasty habit of spitting phlegm and snot at you whenever you tried to approach her at the record shop. Slam had the sheer raw aggression of hardcore without substituting any of that gut-wrenching heaviness, which scratched the frontal lobe of many fans who were partial to a bit of degeneracy in audio form. So where the f did it all go wrong? Because right now if I look up slam metal, I get a white dude with f***ing cornrows rapping like a over chugging riffs and hip-hop samples. Well, before we can get to the modern day, we first need to explore how slam metal began to somewhat develop, which in turn meant introducing many of the elements to the music that the genre originally sought to destroy. Although slam metal had built a decent underground audience, consisting primarily of autists who actively enjoyed damaging their brainstem with consistent heavy riffs and pig squeals. Many artists and purists within the brutal death metal scenes absolutely hated it, with specifically the vocals, sheer heaviness and simplicity being subject to vast criticism. This essentially created a slam spin-off that removed much of the more heavy aspects of the genre, making it sound more akin to the heavier side of regular death metal or deathcore. Examples of this can include Ingested alongside various others who essentially just made deathcore with slam riffs. Over time the production became more polished, and by that I mean the music was actually audible, and bands began introducing elements that were forbidden in previous slam, such as tremolo riffs and solos. Despite this, slam is still as popular today as it was back in the day, although that is entirely due to the fact that slam was never fucking popular to begin with. It's a genre that will likely never see mainstream attention regardless of how watered down it becomes. It's just too grotty and heinous to have people like this listen to it. Well, unless they are pretending to posture online and attempt to be more interesting for Instagram followers and attention, but that's besides the point. Despite the fact that many slam conventions are largely the same in the modern day, if you attempt to listen to the more viral and trendy bands within the scene, you will not hear gut-wrenching distortion akin to Devourment. You're more likely to hear a Bobby Schmurda sample layered with slam riffs and blown out production. So why is this? It's clear hip-hop elements have been present within slam metal since Internal Bleeding, but how has it become so over the top and comedic? Well, this can be explained by one factor of slam metal we have been avoiding this entire time. A lot of this music seems to be created and played by white people who look like this and very occasionally try to emulate or acquire the cultural behavior of another race. Yep, Wigger slam. Wigger slam. And I just want to say, before covering this sub-genre of music, I have literally no interest in delving into race politics in a slam metal video. This style is literally just a meme and I will treat it as such. Although slam is most popular within the modern day through various viral TikTok slam bands like Infectious Jelkin and Vampire, Entorchment would be the first band labelled as genuine slam. This was due to the fact that they actually rapped their growls utilising typical hip-hop rhyming patterns, whilst of course spitting out squealing pig gutturals. Much like Internal Bleeding, which I suppose can be considered slam as well, they also utilised a wannabe gangster attitude throughout the album Digging Up the Remains, which added to the formula, creating a starting point for any lonely suburban kid equally obsessed with Fetty Wap as they are Guttural Slug. Oh yeah, Guttural Slug as well. It's another extremely prominent slam band from the mid-2000s that I was unable to insert into the script in a way that wasn't lazy as f***, so there we go. Let's move away from poorly drawn megalodons and back to another great white, Wiggers. See, that's how you do a transition. Although Internal Bleeding and Entorchment would be labelled slam years after their prominent releases, the term was not utilised at all during their heyday. You'd probably get smacked in the teeth if you dared to call any of the members of these bands a wither. So where the f*** did the term slam actually come from? Well, of course, the only place we can look towards is a true wither of the music game. Sergeant D, aka Finn McKenty. Yep, that's right. Before McKenty started manically reading and replying to every hate comment on his YouTube channel, he was known as Sergeant D and spent his time writing satirical articles on Metal Sucks. It would be within this role that he coined the term slam to define bands within the genre that utilised aspects from hip-hop. Although it was originally coined to highlight bands with hip-hop influence, slam can really refer to anything. It can define the musical style, lyrical themes, or even the way in which the band members dress. The band just has to have that signature vibe and energy. Despite typically referring to, you know, white people, the genre term is actually race neutral within this context. And of course, the term is completely and utterly it's essentially just a joke. If you go to Last.fm and check the top slam artists, you are presented with Rage Against the Machine and Stray from the Path. A prominent band that played a style of slam that would go on to inspire many of the modern day aficionados is Necrophilia, with the album Slam Her with a Sledgehammer. The style incorporated on this album is bouncy as utilising self-aware, ironic humour with prominent hip-hop sections, alongside a visual style that is unapologetically Not to mention the entire album utilises a production that is so blown out it somehow dwarfs much of the typical distortion distortion used by the slam pioneers. Let's now move to the late 2010s, where slam became so over the top and ridiculous, it's almost impossible to discern the irony from the sincerity, mainly because there's literally no sincerity to be found. Vampire is a prominent artist who would start releasing projects in 2018, and since this point have released albums such as Teenage Slamming Turtles and Wiggonometry, so there's that. Although Vampire are actually decently influential to the modern Wigger slam scene, there is no band that has captured the imagination of every Wigger around the world like Infectious Joking. Infectious Joking consists of just one member who typically releases albums in the form of splits with contemporary slam artist Arseny. They would release their first split together in 2022, although wouldn't receive much attention until 2023, when the music video for the song Roke Up in the Wrong Hood would go viral on YouTube. The combination of the ridiculous music video featuring a drummer who is definitely playing the beat I promise, the prominent hip-hop samples, blown out distortion and comedic samples, immediately sent it towards virality. The band have admitted in the past to have essentially just copied the formula that was created by Vampire and Necrophilia, although have been able to do it to a much larger success than the previous two bands, routinely seeing discussion through various memes on social media and having their merch and physical copies sell out pretty consistently online. Instead of being discussed alongside Devourment or Guttural Slug, the band have essentially been bagged in with prominent meme artists from outside the genre of metal. This includes internet meme artists like Joey, with the band even doing a collab with DJ Smokey. Infectious Joking have essentially gone past slam and really highlights the comedic nature of the entire genre, from the disgusting riff to the hip-hop elements to the consistent tributes to brief internal bleeding singer Eric Wigger. They highlight the ridiculous nature of the genre in a way that's so much more appealing to the younger generation than bands like Suffocation or Devourment. Not to say that Devourment is not also extremely popular and almost iconic in the modern day, bands like that just aren't going to receive the same initial attention and virality as a band that sole intention is to essentially create meme music in the form of slam. Despite all of this, Infectious Joking employs riffs that are consistently entertaining and layer it with hip-hop samples in a way that's actually really enjoyable. Despite the music in my eyes just being funny and enjoyable, Infectious Joking have received hate and criticism from many purists within the genre who see slam as a style of music that cannot stray away from being serious, brutal, and most importantly disgusting, which in my eyes is pretty stupid. To highlight this point, we can look towards Devourment and even Eternal Bleeding. I understand this music is intended to be brutal and serious, but hearing a rotten pig squeal over slam riffs on an album called Molesting the Decapitated is far from a serious experience. Metal as a whole is theatric. It always has been ever since the days of Black Sabbath, and although slam intends to strip back the theatrics and technicality of death metal, it replaces it with just another brand of equally over-the-top theatrics. The extreme heaviness, disgusting vocals, the album covers and names, the ability for each musician to somehow turn their instruments into percussion, it's all very over-the-top and insane in a way that's equally similar to something like power metal as it is different. It just employs a different sound and culture. Infectious Joking are a welcome addition to the genre in my eyes. Same with the countless other joke, slam, deathcore and grind artists that continue to pop up in the modern day. Whether you want to make music about frogs, trucks, GTA San Andreas or fucking joking infectiously, I welcome it with open arms. Gone are the days where metal should be seen as a serious genre. I mean, back in the day we had people dress like this and pretend they were in some sort of overly edgy fantasy world. How is that any different from people dressing like this and creating a fantasy in their own head that they are literally a different race whilst playing slam riffs, apart from everything that is inherently wrong with that entire statement I just made and everything I've said in this video?